Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling, using the emotional focused therapy method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DNB Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalai.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our third episode of season 25 a very special guest, author and adoptee advocate and rights, Janet Sherlund. And just like all of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to probably introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Janet, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Janet Sherlund, and I wrote a book called Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. I wrote that, it's a memoir. I'm an adoptee, and I wrote the book to try and allow non-adoptees, first of all, to affirm to other adoptees our experience, and also allow non-adoptees to feel the emotional feeling of what it's like to live and to be raised living a borrowed life. And I love talking about adoptee rights, and I really want people to understand that love is not enough when it comes to raising an adopted child, and that we need to be much more open and really talk about what it feels like to live this life and what an adoptee needs to be supported through that journey.
Beautiful. Well, Janet, thank you so much for being here today. I'm sure that there's a lot of listeners out there that either are parents of adoptees and some others have been adopted and yet never had the chance to be able to meet their biological parents and the relationship that they had to build with them. So, how old were you when you were adopted?
I was adopted about 5 weeks after I was born.
Okay.
So my birth mother didn't want anything to do with me, didn't want to look at me or see me or anything, left me in the hospital to be adopted. I was in foster care for about 5 weeks and then adopted and raised by my adoptive parents, who also adopted three other children from other biological families.
Oh, beautiful. Well, they're definitely very, very kind people. So, what was your journey as you grew up, and when did you discover that you were actually adopted? Did they tell you when you were later? I mean, you're older. Did they tell you when you were younger enough? What was the time that?
We always knew. They never hid that. It was part of our bedtime story. Sort of how we knew how that's how we came into the family. But back then we didn't, no one talked about what that meant or what that felt like. And what it felt like was, despite the fact that you were in a perfectly fine family and loved, you felt something was wrong. You felt different. You felt other. I try to explain to people that when you're adopted, you physically feel the difference. You feel that you are of different DNA, of different blood than your adoptive parents. There's no mistaking it. It's a visceral gut feeling. So you feel other, you feel different. I felt abandoned and lost. I was very aware, even as a child, if I was adopted, that means my real mother, my original mother, gave me up, gave me away. And then, as a child, especially, you're like, I was not wanted. What was wrong with me? What happened? Every time I looked in the mirror, who do I look like? Where did I come from? What is my story? What's my ethnicity? I knew nothing about myself. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, adoptions were sealed. And my adoptive parents' names are on my birth certificate. And you grow up and just with this feeling of a lot of us talk about a big black hole at our center. We feel lost, abandoned. We feel this grief. And again, you can't understand it. It's like, if you're lucky in a good adoptive family like I was, you're like, well, nothing's wrong. It must be me. What's wrong with me? And there's just this lifelong desire to find the missing piece. You kind of feel like, if I can just once reconnect with my birth mother, I'll feel whole again. And maybe then I can move forward.
Okay.
But there's just this, and as with everyone deals with trauma differently. Adoption is a trauma. Uh, and some people numb it with drugs or alcohol. Some people just live in denial. I was, for some reason, propelled through life to try and find the answers. I thought that was heal me if I knew all the facts and found the answers.
And how many years after did you decide or did you find your biological mother or father?
I was in my late 50s. So it was my entire life.
Wow.
So in the days I was searching, there were no DNA websites. There was no social media. So you couldn't just, spit into a tube and be connected with the whole family, or you couldn't put messages out there to the world. There was no way. And again, my everything about my real life and real identity and my heritage had been sealed and kept from me,
Parents,
as just the practice.
but the parents were in the death cert, I mean, in
Yes.
the birth certificate, right? So you could go by name.
No, no, no. Only my adoptive parents' names were on my birth certificate.
Oh,
My
adopted.
biological parents'
I'm
names
so
were
sorry.
not in it.
I thought you
Yeah.
biological.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I see. I
So
misunderstood.
I knew nothing. I didn't know their names. I didn't know where I was born, where I was. I didn't know, again, my ethnicity. There was nothing and nothing to go on. And it wasn't until my late 50s that I discovered my adoption agency was connecting, would reach out to the biological parents of children they had placed. And if both parties agreed, they would connect them. However, that was the state of New Jersey. And in the state of New Jersey, uh, it is still illegal to know who you really, birth records are still sealed. And in 40 states in the United States, birth records are still sealed so that people, even like myself, who's a full grown woman and whose birth parents and adoptive parents have long since passed away, the state is still saying you're not allowed to know who you really are and what your heritage is and what your origin story is. It's pretty incredulous.
The
Yeah.
control that the government has is just horrific and
Yeah.
disgusting, to be honest with you. But it is what it is. This is not the point of the podcast to fight against it.
Right. Right.
So, did you meet your mom, or was your dad alive
I,
still, or no?
when I was like 56, I found this out about my agency, and so I put an application in. You had to apply, and it took about a year for them to get to your name. They had so many adoptees wanting to find this connection, and so finally, it took a year later. You had to go in and be interviewed. They wanted to make sure, I think, that you were a stable person.
Yeah, mentally stable.
But they found my birth mother. She lived just a few towns away from me. And yet, when they contacted her, she said no, she wouldn't meet me. And she had not wanted anything to do with me when I was born. And even though at this point in life, I wanted nothing from her, I'd had a successful life, I didn't need anything from her. I just wanted to meet her, see who I looked like, where I came from. She denied me. And that was devastating. And I didn't understand it. I thought, I'm a grown woman. I have a wonderful life. How could I don't want anything from her. Why doesn't she want to meet me? And it really set me back. I mean, I was really grieved that reaction. Didn't really understand that at the time, but it was very hard to take. It's very unusual too. 96% of birth mothers want to meet the child they gave up, even if that child was the result of rape.
Yeah.
So the agency was shocked and they said, well, it's very unusual because of the 1950s, fathers had no rights, but we do have the name of your biological father. Would you like us to reach him?
Wow.
And I also knew that he did not know he had fathered me. So I knew there now was the 75-year-old man somewhere, had no idea I existed. And they asked if they should reach out to him. I agreed only because I thought, well, maybe I could get some medical information or get it for my sons, but I didn't expect much because there was this man who didn't even know he had bothered me when he was 18 years old. So, um, but much to my surprise, that meeting and that connection changed my life. And when I did meet him, I think I was 57 years old. And even though I couldn't have answered two questions about him, didn't know anything about the man the day we met, I knew his name, and that was about it. The moment we looked into each other's eyes, the moment that big black hole inside of me filled up and I made sense for the first time in my life. It was almost cellular. It was almost like my blood recognized my kin and I was home. It was just it was extraordinary experience.
So, when you saw him for the first time, Janet, how did he respond? Did he say, I had no clue you existed, or did he say, I'm sorry, your mom made the decision to let you go?
Yeah. He was, I knew from the agency that when they first called him, he was sitting home watching Jeopardy and he had been he was a retired New York State trooper. And I think he thought it might have been a prank. So he told them, call me back tomorrow night. And he verified the agency. When they called back, he said, if she has my blood, she's my daughter. Of course, I want to meet her. And we met about a month later. And he was just so open and so kind. He came up to me, put his hands on my hands and looked right in my eyes and said, "You're Janet." And he was just so accepting of me. And as was his family, it was just beautiful. It was incredible. And such a difference from my birth mother who, would have nothing to do with me. And he did it as we got to know each other, and we had about 2 years together before he sadly passed away. But um, you know, I had been stolen from him basically. He'd never been told that I existed. He never had been given a chance to raise me with his mother or his eventual wife. And he often talked about when we were together, he'd say, I never had the chance to like walk you up the aisle or things he wasn't really thinking like I certainly had an adoptive father that did that, but there was a lot of regret and sorrow in his knowledge once we got together because, I had been living this whole time and he had never known it, and he had been denied the opportunity to know a child of his.
So he
It
never
was
knew
sad.
that your mother was pregnant of you.
No,
So he must have been this must have been something like he met her and after he never saw her again.
no, they dated for 2 years in high school. So they'd been going out for 2 years, and then she got pregnant. This was the 1950s, and being pregnant out of wedlock was a very shameful thing back then. So she moved away, never told him, broke up with him, never told him, and she and her mother left town and then never came back. And he
Oh,
never knew.
okay. Oh my God. So
Yeah,
between the 2 years that he finally knew that you existed, Janet, how
yeah.
was your relationship with him?
It was wonderful. I tell people now, I tell you, meeting a parent in late in life is perfect because there's no baggage. I mean, he just delighted in meeting me, and I reminded him a lot of my birth mother and made him feel 18 again. And I wanted to hear all of his stories. I wasn't tired of hearing them. And he hadn't raised me. I hadn't grown up with him. There was no baggage. And so we could just both come at each other with just joy and love and openness and trying to find out all we could about each other and our families. And it was really an extraordinary experience.
I would think. I mean, um, did you know what is the percentage of families or biological parents that get the opportunity to be able to meet their biological child, but that was given by to other parents? Is there a statistic that's out there that is actually available?
I don't know the statistic. I think it's very rare. And sadly, even though adoption has evolved in some cases and there are now open adoptions, I recently learned that open adoptions are not legally binding. And so, more often than not, sadly, the adoptive parents choose to sort of renege on the agreements they made with the birth parent, and they just let the child sort of disappear and take them from their lives. So, I think open adoption, while it exists, it's rare that it's done in the way you'd expect it to be done, and it's still fraught with so much. And I was shocked to find out it's not legally binding. The adoptive parents can basically walk away from that agreement.
Wow. So then when it comes to your relationship, you said that you do have sons, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Um, so did you feel that when you knew that you were adopted since a young age, did the trauma followed you all through your life, or were
Yeah.
you able to just cope with the reality that this is exactly what happened, cope with the reality that there was nothing wrong with you specifically, Janet, that it was a choice made by an adult and not made by you. So how did you let go of this child trauma?
A lot of help. Yeah, no, again, the trauma stayed with me. I at around age 12 started having terrible panic attacks. And they stayed with me until my 20s. I had siblings that turned to drugs and alcohol. Others just lived in great denial. I started finding out about early childhood development when I was in college. And that kind of led me to some of the very early studies about adoption. And I started realizing that I wasn't alone. And it wasn't until a couple decades later that there was more available on adoption. Books like The Primal Wound came out, and I was just stunned to read them because it was like, oh my God, this is my reality. I haven't been alone. And I got therapy on and off throughout life that was always very helpful. I don't think you can navigate something this traumatic alone, because that's what you do feel alone. And it took educating myself and reaching out. I worked so hard to find all the pieces of myself and understand them, and integrate the adopted me and the biological me, to get to a point where I felt like I had the strongest core and sense of self that I'd ever had.
Mm.
But it takes a lot of work. It's hard and you need support, but you can get through. The only way out is through. And the only way I found peace with this is to find out everything I did. Yeah, it takes help and a lot of work.
But in a way, based on what you said earlier, if I caught that properly, you said that um, the adoptive parents, you did have siblings that were also adopted. So didn't you share commonalities with them? So in a way, you were not alone versus them being biological, and you were the only adopted kid in that family?
No, we didn't talk about it.
Like,
No one talked about it. No one addressed it. We all knew we were adopted, but we didn't talk about what that meant. But you felt it. I talk about in my book, sitting around the dinner table, being very aware that each of us was sitting in our own genetic dust. We were all from different DNA. We were participating with each other, but we didn't belong to each other. And you just felt it. And yet, again, nothing was wrong. It was a perfectly fine family. We were all four kids sitting around the table, but you just felt like they're
strangers.
different. They're different. They're a different self than I am. And not just because they're a different sibling with slightly different tweaks of the DNA. You just felt the difference. So it's a really cellular sort of vast, it really something that you experience. When I first wrote the book, was using the title "The Blood Calls" because it was this like search for my blood and my biology and my heritage that drove me through life. The publisher said, "Oh no, that sounds like a vampire novel. Novel, you can't use that
That's how
title."
much fun is
But
it?
that's sort of the feeling of it was searching for the origins, like the genetic origins of myself. It was just a drive that I felt. And sadly, no, we didn't talk about it. We couldn't take comfort in our experiences with each other. Later in life, as young adults, my sister and I talked about it, but I guess part of it was just the society at the time and culturally we didn't.
No, for sure. Now, as adults, Janet, like later on in life, how's your relationship with your, I don't know if you could call adoptive siblings? So, is there something that you said that some of them are either in drugs or whatever it is, but are they others out of the four, including you, that you have a closer relationship one in particular versus the other?
I guess so. My older brother passed away, sadly, a few years back, and my younger brother lives far away. We certainly talk but few and far between, sort of we're at a distance. And my younger sister, she's 7 years younger than me. She struggled with addiction and um, behavioral issues and personality disorders and things. And I finally got to a point, and I was very much like her second mother growing up. I mean, I really did a lot for her and took care of her a lot. And it got to the point where I had to really just pull back. We're still in touch. We still talk, and I still help take care of her. But it was becoming very toxic, and I needed to
Absolutely.
protect myself.
Now, do you feel more protective of your biological kids? Do you feel that because of the experience that you went through and because you actually brought to life kids, so now you didn't want them to go through what you went through, and that causes you to become either a better mother? It's not I'm saying that you were a bad mother before, but a better person, and you felt that you valued their presence more.
Well, I know that I just wanted to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. Like when I was raising children, it was an era where a lot of women were starting to really have careers and be, two career families. And all I wanted to do, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it, I just wanted to stay home and be a full-time mom. I mean, it was like I wanted to be for my children the mother I didn't have. And I did have an adopted mother, obviously, but she was a sort of a real career woman too, and not really mothering wasn't really something she turned out to be interested in. So um, it really meant a lot to me to get to stay home and be with my children and just have that be my full-time job, and I treasure that. Uh, and and it's interesting. People have asked me, if I would have adopted, if I couldn't have had children, would I have adopted? And I went, no, I wouldn't have wanted to. It's it's so much. Uh, it's just so much. So I find that still now interesting that I say that, and I know a lot of other adoptees say that too. It's a friend of mine has said, those of us who are adopted wouldn't wish this on anybody. It is trauma. And it's not culturally recognized. People think, oh, you should be grateful you had a good family, you were taken in. But two things can be true at once. You can be grateful for a good adoption and have been traumatized by being separated from your heritage and your authentic, family of origin and your authentic identity.
But
Um,
for those who could not biologically have kids because of whatever is going on, I mean, they always love the fact that they could give a family, like they could give a home to those kids who didn't have the opportunity to be able to be raised by their biological parents. So in a way, it's kind of like it brings somewhat of a balance in our universe, come to think of it, because if they are all in adoptive care or they're bouncing from foster home to the other, that causes those kids a lot more trauma long term. So in a way, those who actually adopt the kids, they have somewhat of an understanding that this is something that they're saving lives, even though the kid is not necessarily in danger, physical danger. But now when we go with foster care, we don't know what's out there, Janet. We don't know what's going on with those poor kids that in their development years, they end up getting mental health condition, mental illness, and the list goes on and on.
yeah. Well, I will say, and I don't, like I said, I haven't experienced foster care myself. I do know that, I don't want to rank trauma here and compare it, but a friend of mine who did experience foster care growing up said, at least in foster care, you know your origins. You usually have known your parents, have seen them. You've usually seen the family you came from, and you usually think of foster care as being temporary. We all certainly hear terrible stories about the foster care system, and many of those kids are so grateful to find full-term families.
Exactly, yes.
However, that adoption is also a trauma, and the primal foundational trauma of being separated and removed from your birth parent and living a pretend life is also traumatic. It's just not recognized. It's not seen. And people are measuring, being in a maybe wealthier home as being a better life than being with remaining with someone in your family of origin, like in a kinship adoption.
Mhm.
I also want to point out that that as much as I can understand someone who can't have children being devastated by that, I certainly would have been. It's not it's not your human, your natural right to have a child. If you can't have a child, that may be your trauma and crisis in life, but you don't deserve or you aren't owed a child. You're not owed someone else's child. And
Mhm.
that's what adoption is. It's someone else's child that you're then raising. And there are great influences upon biological mothers who now give up children more because of financial reasons than the shame of the 1950s.
That's true, yes.
And yet our government spends 10 times as much on keeping children in foster care and stranger adoption than keeping them in kinship families. And there are lots of the adoption industry is an industry. $23 billion a year is spent on finding children to give to parents who want to adopt. And so there's a lot of pressure put culturally and legally from religions as well on biological parents who are made to feel like, it's in the best interest of that child to be given up. When that child's point of view ultimately may be, I would have rather been with my family of origin.
Yes.
Nothing was, you didn't mistreat me, but I can't say enough how important it is to a human being to be with their people and with their family of origin. It is a primary, primal, fundamental, should be a right.
Absolutely. So do you think, Janet, if the government is using a different angle in a way where it says that if you are a soon-to-be parent and you're struggling financially, contact us, we will help you so you could keep your biological kid instead of giving it away. Maybe the parents will have more incentive to keep the kid and to be able to raise them because they get the support from the government and allow them to be able to have the luxury to have their kid around them versus having to give them away. So do you think that if they choose this angle instead of like spending so much money in redirecting those kids to other adoptive family, that may change the perspective of how all things is
I
happening?
think if we as a culture recognize the trauma that it is for a child to be placed with strangers, no matter how loving and kind those strangers ultimately are, that we should value and redirect resources to keeping children with their kinship family. And maybe people will say to me, "Oh, but what if the birth mother is a drug addict or something?"
Yes,
Yeah, but maybe their grandparents or an aunt and uncle or someone in that family who would like to raise that child and could, and maybe they need some assistance to do so. But ultimately, that child, and then other people say, "Oh, what if the family has a lot of issues?" Well, when you're born into your biological family, you don't come into the world saying, "I don't want a family with any issues." I mean, what family doesn't have issues? So, you know, allow a child to, I think fundamentally, and at the core, a child will have a stronger sense of self within their own biological family than facing the issues that they'll ultimately face with, in a closed adoption or with a stranger adoption.
now, what I find incredible with you, Janet, based on your story, is something that I never expected because you spent basically your whole life trying to find and track down your parents. And then when you did find your father, you were able to reconnect in a way that was something that for most, after the kids especially being so-called abandoned, they would never want to be able to even interact with their father because of all the rage and frustration that has been um, gathered or tallied up inside of them. So, but because he didn't know you existed, so in a way, this is a different angle as to why, if he knew, he could have told his girlfriend of 2 years or your mom to say, if you don't want to give him or give her away, I'll take him or I'll take her. So
Yeah.
that makes it that could have changed the whole perspective.
Yeah, and now my birth mother didn't want to meet me. So it was there could have been, anger and rage at her for that. Um and there was, I wouldn't say rage, there was I was just devastated.
Yes.
I was just devastated that she couldn't ever allow me into her life when I didn't need anything from her. I didn't need her to mother me or parent me. I didn't need money from her. I didn't need anything but just to know her. Luckily, her 5 children welcomed me with open arms, and I'm close to them, and they gave me the access to that side of my family and access to that side of myself, and were just so wonderful and supportive. And I was so lucky to find them.
So hold on. So her biological kid after you, she had five additional kid afterwards,
Yeah.
and you were able to connect with.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
did you find them?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I guess once I had her name, trying to think of it, go back, and then also my biological father had gone to all the high school reunions, and she had gone to reunions too, and there were, lists of, children that you had, people were catching up with each other. So I think I had some of the names. I was able to Google some. And so she got married within the year after having me to another man, to a different man, and then started having children right away and had these 5 kids. They all lived within a half an hour of where I was living.
Oh,
And so, and we're all totally shocked when they got my letter.
after
Um,
they're,
but
they're all around. Well, you probably like just a couple of years or so older than them. So, when it comes to that, did you like get to know them when you were like mid 50s, and then now they're all still alive, or some of them are?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah, no, they're all also alive. I had 3 siblings on my biological father's side and 5 on my biological mother's side. And we still get together. They come visit me on Nantucket. I visit them when I'm down in New Jersey. It's it was really wonderful to have that connection.
that
And
is.
that really helped me a lot.
So tell us before we conclude the podcast, Janet, tell us about your book. Where can people find it?
It's Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. It's on Amazon, at Barnes& and Noble, on bookshop.org, usually any place, hopefully, that you find books. There's also an audiobook out there in case you like to listen to audiobooks. And I wrote it so that we could really open this conversation about the adoptee experience and point of view, and hopefully open the hearts and minds of those who read it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Janet, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 25 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Adoption is a powerful act of love that overcomes life challenges, transforming both a child and a parent's life. It offers hope, where a child finds a family and parents discover deeper purpose. Choosing adoption despite life stresses reflect a heart willing to prioritize compassion over convenience. Now, this journey cultivates resilience, patience, and the profound joy of unconditional love. The sacrifices it requires, whether time, energy, or resources, are rewarded in countless meaningful moments. Now, adoption shows that family is built on care and commitment, not just biology, proving that life stresses pale in comparison to the joy of providing a loving home. It's a lasting gift that turns uncertainty into opportunity and leaves a legacy of kindness for generations to come. My name is Dr. Dan Emzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.